Welcome to another episode of Feature Fridays, and today I'm joined by Mark Stockham. Mark, why don't you just give yourself an introduction to the folks who don't know you?
Thanks, Guy. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're viewing this. My name is Mark Stockham. I work for Dell Technologies within the Data Protection Solutions division, specifically working with those elements of our solutions that integrate with VMware. So that's vSphere, the vRealize suite, VMware Cloud Director, as well as some of the Kubernetes and container Tanzu side of things, which is new and interesting.
Excellent. And for those who don't know me, my name is Guy Bartram. I'm the Product Marketing Director for Cloud Director Availability. And that's why we've got you on today, Mark. We have been providing data protection service integration with VCD, with the Dell Data Protection plugin for, I think must be about 2 years now. And it's been in the program in the product user guide. It's available via points for our service providers to consume in a monthly consumption-based mechanism, which is great. But we wanted to do a refresh because some of the material we had out there was a bit dated. There's been some changes to the product capabilities, and really wanted to dive into some detail of you, Mark, and find out what that was.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for the opportunity, Guy. I will cover the cloud provider points program a little bit later on, but
Okay.
yeah, thanks for mentioning it. It's pretty interesting. I think we're the only data protection solution that actually is part of the program.
That is true. That is absolutely true. So, should we start with just kind of a bit of a recap about data protection then, and what the solution entails, and then have a dive into the plugin?
Absolutely. So I'll dive through a couple of brief slides, and then we'll get into the demonstration of the solution itself to give you an idea as to what it looks and feels like and what the capabilities are.
Awesome.
So starter for one is, we have an unique method of getting data away from virtual machines in the first place. And this does pay dividends a little bit later on in the slide deck. So the point here really is we use a certain methodology using the V proxies, a virtual machine that sits in close proximity to the virtual machines and the VApps that we're protecting with the solution. What this means is we can do things like client-side deduplication, change block tracking, very close to the virtual machine. Yep. This is useful for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we can carry out tasks within the clusters, etc. So encryption, etc. We're a member of the cluster. We've got visibility of the virtual machines. Additionally, the deduplication and the change block tracking means that we move less data across the network, which might not seem particularly interesting. But if you're a service provider and you have that requirement for moving a lot of data across the network, or you want minimal impact to the other services on the network, you're going to want to minimize your network traffic. So we minimize the traffic. We also...
It's speed as well, right? I mean, you're going to get a much faster
by minimizing the traffic, by having far less stuff going across the wire, we're able to back things up faster, but equally restore things faster. And the change block tracking, backup and restore is, it's a feature that VMware exposes that not every vendor uses. So it's one of those easy pickings, if you like, if you just want to adopt that technology. So that's great for network utilization and the client side of things. But at the back end, we've also got the data domains that you're probably familiar with from all the years. They've been around for a long time. Everyone's familiar with data domain. So we've got client side and the back end deduplication working together. And this means we can really push that storage utilization down, store far less. And the benefit there for a service provider is they can provide these services at less back end cost to to themselves. And in an ideal world, the user benefits too.
Yeah, I think it's so just take me through where do the proxies need to reside then? Are they residing on each host, or
they just need to be part of a cluster? So we don't need too many. Obviously, the more you deploy, the more resilience you have, the more scalability you have. You may have certain situations where you'd need more, but you only really need one per cluster as a starter for one. It does depend, but what this means is it's just a stateless OVA, can be spun up, spun down relatively easily. So it's not particularly onerous. There is always a cost. There's no such thing as a zero cost backup in terms of CPU, memory, disk, as we know. but we keep it as light as possible. It's a very light footprint.
Okay, and you mentioned data domains, so those are obviously kind of physical units. Can the solution be virtualized at all?
So the data domain that we're probably familiar with, we see these big pictures of racks full of data domains. Yeah, there are the physical data domains. There is also the ability to consume data domains as part of an appliance, so that we have an all-in-one, the data protection appliances. But there is a virtual edition as well. So you can deploy a DDVE, Data Domain Virtual Edition, can be deployed very, very simply and easily, and again, forms part of that vCloud provider program consumption model. So yeah, there's definitely options available. And equally, the VCPP program is great, but if there are other commercials in place, those can be used as well. So we're not entirely 100% VCPP.
No, obviously providers can negotiate separately for the different components they want if they wish to do so.
Or they might have the DD already. I mean, some customers have already got data domains and seem quite surprised that they can just point the solution at a data domain and away they go.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, so if a service provider was looking to just get started or trial the solution, they could quite easily do this in a 100% virtualized environment, right?
Absolutely. We find some customers where they want to consume that way. Others, for whatever reason, have got a standard physical or an IDPA, data protection appliance approach. At the end of the day, the data domains are pretty much equal under the covers. It's the same code base, just a different deployment method.
And I think am I correct in saying that you only get the real kind of data deduplication optimization when you actually use the physical devices, or is that no longer the case, or is that a myth?
Absolutely. No, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of myths that need to be busted in this. No, the deduplication is a byproduct of the intellectual property, the patents and IP that are part of the platform. There is no difference. If you land certain data on a DDVE, an appliance, or a physical data domain, you will get the same level of deduplication. It does have an impact on scale. So the physical data domains are up to sort of 1.5 petabytes. The virtual and integrated appliances have different scaling levels. But the great advantage of doing something software defined is when you fill one up, you can just spin another one up. So horses for courses. But no, the dedupe is common across all platforms.
Okay.
Fantastic. No, good questions. Thank you very much.
That's all right.
Keep me on my toes here. So, a number of points here around the fact that we can easily automate this. I've mentioned it in the terms of Cloud Director, but also if you're doing this for other workloads, very easy to spin this up, integrate with something like vRealize automation, which I know some service providers use behind the scenes under the covers as well.
Yeah.
And there's a whole load of things that we integrate with from a VMware perspective. We've got the VCF integration side of things. Cloud Director, obviously today. Just a quick point that Kubernetes is huge. A huge new space that we've been working with VMware for some time on protecting those workloads for, and the vRealize side of things too. All of them getting the benefit of this better, faster data path, dedupe, etc., etc. So when it comes to Cloud Director, as you so rightly said, being able to do all of this, processing allows us to have higher performance and better efficiency. And you did actually steal my thunder a little bit there, Guy.
Sorry, mate.
It's absolutely fine. We can use the software suite. We can have the Power Protect data domains that we talked about earlier on. The rebranding recently is Power Protect data domain, not just data domain, and the integrated appliances that we mentioned earlier on. Source side dedupe. This tends to pay some pretty big dividends in the Cloud Director space because of the number of templates and the commonality of the workloads. Because the workloads tend to be quite common, the dedupe actually gets ratcheted up another level or two. And I have a number of EMEA customers who are really blowing the socks off the sort of rates that we even talk about in general terms or guarantee to our customers. So I've seen some pretty big numbers out there in terms of deduplication, 70, 90 to 1. Of course, depends how you're calculating these things.
Yeah.
And as we said earlier on, the scale-out architecture is based around the spinning up of additional data domain virtual editions when you want to. I'll come on to that, how that actually works in a slide or two. But fundamentally, because we're doing things more efficiently, it's faster. The bandwidth requirement is tiny by comparison with others. Also, it tends to have less overhead on some of the VMware Cloud Director resources that are being used. The backup streams means there's more parallelism, means we can keep those windows, those backup windows smaller. And I mentioned the dedupe earlier on. So a little bit of a marketing slide there, but I think it makes the point that this is an optimized solution.
Yeah, it's important when providers are looking at different solutions that they consider the TCO of these solutions, and these numbers here obviously have a big impact. And if you're making any capital investment or any investment at all in this, it's not just that the service experience is going to be good because it's integrated with VCD. It's going to be pleasantly fast, and as you say, that's a benefit for the customer, but also there's these benefits to bear in mind for the provider.
Yeah, and it's when you get to scale as well. If you are operating at thousands, tens of thousands, many tens of thousands of VMs, it really does start to become critical that you're not wasting any resources that you're trying to use to provide that as a service offering to your customer. So let's get down into how this actually starts to break down for service providers and their customers. To start off with, on the left-hand side of the image, we have the terminology is not quite right because it doesn't quite fit in there. So apologies for it still saying VMware Cloud Director organization at the top there. Yeah. So we're able to break things down by VDC level. We've got the various services, and the cloud admin or the system admin is the person that's going to be operating at this level. They're going to be setting data protection policies which are then published to be consumed on the tenant side. We're going to be able to set quotas because, as we know, familiar with Cloud Director from my previous life, when you open up things like an as a service offering, infrastructure as a service, everyone rushes in and consumes the resources. We've seen this also from a data protection perspective. You open up data protection and people say, okay, I'm going to take a backup every 5 minutes because I can, because the resource is free. So let's set quotas. Let's just make sure we're not taking an unreasonable amount of these paid for resources to provide services out to those end user customers. We can also set which repositories are being used, and this is critical. I'll talk about this a little bit later on. Set up replication. If you want to move that data that's been protected, obviously you're going to have a repository in one place. We're aware data domains create a replication as well. We can set another replica, get that data off site or to a secondary data center ready to be restored. And we can also monitor what's going on from a job perspective, but that's probably something that the tenant admin is going to do rather than the overall system admin.
Yep.
On the right-hand side, applying those configured policies, looking at in-place restores or new restores of apps and VMs, that whole self-service recovery and file level recovery is made available, as well as monitoring. So you can see we've got an entire organization. We've got the virtual data centers broken down here. Virtual data center might have a VApp or an individual VM that needs to be protected, and that individual VApp might be broken down into individual VMs. So we can protect at the sub VApp level. So we could actually say we're only going to protect VM2 under this VApp. We can have an entire VApp protected, or we can protect standalone VMs as well. And we can set policies at various different levels, which we'll do in a second in the demo.
Okay.
So, the user experience, everything tied into that user interface, no jumping out to external interfaces that we had to do in the past because it was a restriction that was in place with the architecture. These days, everything's done throughout the VMware Cloud Director UI based upon role-based access control. Again, we'll see that in a second. We've got the performance, we've got the pricing through VCloud Provider Program. I'm going to bring up the PUG in a second, the user guide pages, just showing where we sit and what that looks like. But if the customer or the service provider is looking for that all-in-one VCPP consumption model, we can obviously facilitate that, keeping the cost down and making sure that that we have several exabytes out in the cloud. So this is probably not our first rodeo.
Very true.
So all I've done is gone to the latest version of the user guide, just to make the point that you have to scroll a long way down because it's a long way down there. There's lots of VMware products to be consumed. But what this does tell you is, to your point earlier on about the data domain virtual editions, there is a SKU that allows you to use the data mover to get the data away from that virtual machine or that out of the VMware Cloud Director environment to a data domain that you may already own or may have purchased a different way. So this is the lower cost method. You can then pay a little bit more, and that then gives you the ability to consume that on a per VM level that includes the data domain virtual edition. So there's data mover only and data mover and data domain virtual edition. So two options. Sometimes people get a little bit confused that there are two prices, and the lower one is the data mover only. The higher one includes the data domain virtual edition. So you don't, as you said, if someone wants to onboard, start their journey, it's very easy to do that because it's all software defined.
Got it.
And then we get into the interesting part, which is, what does this actually look like under the covers? So, there are certain virtual machines, containers, etc., that constitute this data protection extension, and they're all wrapped up into an individual virtual machine. The latest version that we have brought to market not only has everything all in one in terms of the user interface, but it also has everything bundled up into one single virtual machine that gives us all of these elements that then talk to Cloud Director and the backup gateways. So previously, multiple machines, slightly more complex. These days, the primary node can be sized small, medium, and large, which gives us scalability up to tens of thousands of VMs. All this information is actually in the documentation pack that you can download, but I think this one paints a good picture to start off with. Won't go into too much detail because that would blow the budget in terms of time for today. So that's the PowerPoint element out of the way. What I'd like to do now, if I may, is jump into the remote desktop session that gives us a view as to what's going on in the UI and what the capabilities of the product are. So, Guy, anything to add before I jump away from PowerPoint and into product itself?
No, that's great. I think a lot of that was kind of known to me. I guess the new pieces that I haven't seen is the ability to do file level restores within the UI, that type of thing, because previously you had to jump out of the UI. But yeah, I'd be interested in diving into detail in the demo. I haven't really got anything else to add to the PowerPoint.
Fantastic. So you might notice standard web browser based UI. If you click on the VMware Cloud Director bar, we're just in the usual suspect, VMware Cloud Director, as you'd expect. Mm-hmm. I've got two tabs open for a very specific purpose. First of all, we're logged in as the administrator, sysadmin. Top level, this allows us to set policies, to define those things that are consumed by the vCorp admin here, the organizational admin, the tenant admin. So this is the consumer. The administrator is the definer of services, if you like. So Let's start off, drop down within the UI, probably familiar with it. There's now a data protection option once you've deployed the data protection extension. So to start off with, we'll work from the bottom up. We've got some tasks, a little task pane down the bottom telling us that we've already carried out some backups and we've cleaned up some data. More interesting on the right-hand side, got a bit more visibility here. We can see that the SQL server's been backed up, which organization it's part of. It has been successful. We can filter on various different parameters, what time it started, how long it took. Mm-hmm. So we can drill also into a little bit more detail, get exact details about what's happened there. But we can see already that we've carried out an ad hoc backup. So we have two options. We'll go through that in 1 second. We have the ability to set scheduled backups, so daily, weekly, monthly, multiple times daily, which of course, sort of fire and forget. You set those up, they run, no one has much interaction. We also have the ability to set a backup that can be triggered by the tenant admin. So it might be that you have a maintenance window or whatever. You might want to dive into that. So, and obviously it's good for demos. I can kick off an ad hoc backup, show you what the backup process looks like. We then jump into the org VDC. So we've only got one available here right now. I can click on that and that then selects that for changes. What I can see here is that ad hoc backups are enabled for this particular org VDC. I could disable it. Depends on what the policy is that I need for my consumers. We can also see which vCenter we're referring to, how many vApps are protected, which org we're part of. We can jump out to a pop out if we need to. What I can also do is click on that org and then start to see a little bit more information about what's going on. It is enabled for data protection. We can back it up. You can have some that are and some that aren't. We have ad hoc backup enabled, just mentioned that. We were talking about the storage, the repositories, the data domains earlier on. The repository is also something that we can view here. So I can go in and I can create a new backup repository, or I can specify a read-only data domain. So it might be that we've got multiple data domains. We might want to set one as a read-only repository because it's got a lot of data in that we might want to restore from. So we've got multiple options here. We can also dig down into this and see what state it's in. So we can see that it's enabled. We've set quotas on it. So it might be we don't want to consume all of the data domain. We can see where it's routing its data from, and we can see that backups and restores are allowed. Replication, we don't have that set up right now. This lab's just in the process of having replication enabled on it. That's why it was having some niggles earlier on, but it's now up and running. Replication will be set up soon. And we can now also see which VApps or VMs are being protected on that repository. So we can get a reasonable amount of data about what's going on there. We can also jump in and see which policies are available to this org VDC. So we've got on demand, ad hoc, we've got daily. We can drill into that if we want to and see exactly what that looks like, how much quota it has enabled, what the schedule actually is, how long we're retaining that data for. Options relate to flags, so we can look for flags and protect certain things through flags, and which assets are protected with those policies there. We can then jump into the organization itself. So again, we can flag ad hoc backup settings on or off.
So just going back to that, those flags, are they anything associated with metadata in vCenter?
Yeah, VMware Cloud Director flags.
Oh, Cloud Director. Yeah, okay.
So yeah, we can interact with those.
Right.
Doesn't tend to be particularly highly used, but it's available. We architected this with VMware a couple of years back when we first started, and that was a requirement. So we've added it in.
Okay.
We've then got the appliance side of things as well. So you click on a new appliance. If it's already existing, there'll be an Avamar front end with a data domain back end, or we've already got one set up here. And again, we can see which versions, which stores are available. See that DDVE we talked about earlier on sitting back there with a certain amount of capacity and a certain amount of usage, which vCenters we're tied into, and whether there are any orphan VMs as well. So we're still logged in at the moment as an admin. So as an admin, we can go and we can set these policy templates that are then going to be consumed by the tenant admin. So we mentioned the option sets earlier on. So which flags do you want to be able to consume? We're not going to have any at the moment. We're going to have no option sets. And as with all data protection, we're going to have set retention periods. I've set 30, 60, 90. You could equally go in and set a 120 if you wanted to. Or we have this concept of adaptive retention. So you might want to keep dailies for a certain amount of time, and then a certain number of weeklies and monthlies and yearlies, which gives you that granularity and that length of tail, if you like. So we have the ability to do that should we want to. You've then got not just the period you keep the data for, but how often you want to go in and make that data backed up from the VApp or VMs onto the storage. So I've got daily, ad hoc, and 3 times daily, 3 times daily being one that I've set up fairly recently. And then you publish this in a catalog. So these catalogs are the roll-up of all of this information that's then consumed by the tenant admin. So we've already got one in here that says 3 times a day, kept for 30 days, using the particular template that I've just created. And that's something that can then be consumed by the tenant admin. So this is where all the heavy lifting gets done. You don't tend to go in and make too many changes here. You set it up as an admin, and then of course you log in as a, doesn't matter how prepared you think you are, it always times out, doesn't it? There we go. So then we log in as VCorp admin. And this obviously has less rights, but this is more the consumer of the services that we've defined on the left-hand side. So again, logged into VCloud Director, very similar. Click on More, Data Protection, and you'll see a slightly different view of the world. We'll see virtual data centers that either don't necessarily have a repository allocated or that they do. So you might have multiple virtual data centers, some of which have protection services. You might be offering them to some of your customers or tenants and not others. In this case, we're only going to look at the ones we're interested in from a data protection perspective. There is only one of one VDCs with the repository. There are only 3 policies, as we saw when we were in the admin view. We've got 19 gig used out of half a terabyte, ad hoc retention set to 60 days. Nothing's going wrong at the moment by the looks of things. And we can see a bit of a view here as to which the default policy is. We can have multiples, but we can also set a policy that says, okay, anything new that spins up here has the default policy applied, and then we manage by exception if we want that 3 times a day or whatever. And we've also got a repository that's already set, backup repo, imaginatively named. We can see how many of the VMs that we have deployed are protected, 6 out of 6, 100%, and how much storage is being used, in this case, 95 gigs. And a bit of a bar chart there as well as the same logs as we saw earlier on, always sitting down there down the bottom.
So would it be easy to see which VMs I didn't have protected in this view then?
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got unprotected VMs, you can very easily drill down into it. Unfortunately, we've got them all protected because it's a small environment. But yeah, absolutely. Spin up and it'd be very easy to do that. Bit outside of the scope of today, but could absolutely do that.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's click in. Once we click in, again, we've got that task view of the world as you can see. I should have closed that down, shouldn't I? So tasks already run. The policies. So these are the policies that were previously deployed or provisioned. And now you can see 3 times daily. It's not in use. Daily, 6 vApps. On demand, not being used. You can see which one's default. You can see VMs that have been migrated in from other sources or storage or repositories. But probably what makes the most sense is to start sort of from the top down and give you an idea as to what these views are. They should be pretty similar between the various products in the family, in the Dell DPS Power Protect family. We tend to talk about assets as being those things that can be protected, and copies are the copies, the images, copies that we can go and take restores from. So under assets, let's click on vApps. You can see that there's a certain number of vApps already in existence, some running, some not. You can see how many VMs comprise that vApp, whether they have a lease, whether they are eligible for ad hoc backups. So some are and some aren't. Some don't have that policy applied. And what policy is being applied to them, so all daily in this case. So let's have a look at that SQL server. That SQL server itself, we can go in and look at the policy. Maybe we want to change it, or we just want to review it and make sure that we're happy with that policy. That policy could be broken down by individual VMs within that vApp, or we could change the policy that applies. We can also power it on if we want to. It's suspended right now. We can look at its activities, or we could carry out a backup. So let's do an ad hoc backup of it just to prove that this thing works. So ad hoc backup kicked off. You can see it started. It'll run around in the background. We've also got the ability to view standalone VMs. We can see orphan VMs in the sysadmin view that we saw earlier on. No standalone VMs here. You can see down the bottom the initial start of that process has kicked off, and we can see that the backup's starting to run in the background. Should just be using all that change block tracking we talked earlier on about, so there shouldn't be much change between what was backed up last time and what was backed up this time.
So standalone VMs, is that the same then as in terms of nomenclature here as orphan VMs?
Now, an orphan VM would be one that's not sitting within an org. This would be just a standalone VM. So you can have vApps that are multi-VM wrapped virtual applications, and you can have individual VMs that are available through VMware Cloud Director. So yeah, it's slightly different.
Okay.
You then get to the copies side of things. So of course, these are copies that are currently residing on that backup repository. We could have multiples, many read-only ones if we had lots and lots of historical data, but at the moment, just got this repository. And you can see that there's a bunch of backups available. If we click on the little hamburger bar, we can see which backups pertain to that particular name. So we can see that there's a backup that occurred 13 hours ago, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. days. And we can also start to drill down into that and say, okay, I want to take that backup. Actually, I'm going to go back one. I'm going to use the SQL one as an example because I know that it works better. Let's show the backups. We've got one running, but we're going to go to the one from 14 hours ago. And we're going to say, okay, we can either do a restore to new. So we can either go through the process and say, I want to create, because it's currently running, even though it's suspended, we can't restore it in situ because there's already something there. We have to give it a new, even newer SQL name. New SQL. There we go. Give it a description. Go through the process of adding those, making sure all the virtual machines in there are fine. Restore its initial lease. It's a single VM, so no start order. We're not going to restore the network because it would conflict with the existing one. And we can kick off that restore process in the background, and you can see that that restore is running in the background. Equally,
So if it's not going to, if it's not going to restore that network, what network is it going to attach to?
It won't have any networking. You'll need to go in once that's been brought back. You go in and change its network settings. If we'd lost that VM, or we were restoring, we powered down the VM and we restored it in situ, we could bring it back with its network settings. But of course, you don't want that conflict in place. It's just options really.
Mm-hmm.
So then we've got the standalone VM side of things. Then you've got those migrated VMs that we talked about earlier on, and I'm sort of hoping that backup finished. Yeah, the backup finished. Oh, it's still running, not quite finished yet. So I've now confused things by running a backup and a restore at the same time. But the backup's almost finished. The restore's in a good state as well. And we, like I said earlier on, we can go in and look at those copies, and we do have that ability to go in and do show those backups. Let's go to a different one, and then we can go and do a file level restore and start to go through the browsing of files, etc., should we need to go and pull that data out. And as you mentioned, in previous lives, we've had to jump out to a third party, in fact the Avamar, not a third party, it's us, user interface, and then do a separate login, etc. With the current version, actually it's been in place for the past couple of versions, we've got the ability to do file level restore natively in the user interface, so we can go and pull those files out. File level restores probably 2 or 3 releases old. It's been in this UI for a couple of versions now. Everything was in the UI previous version to the current one. What we really focused on with this version was getting everything into one package to make it much easier to deploy and install, as that was a big customer ask, because it wasn't as simple as it could have been previously. We've now listened and deployed what customers have asked for. That's actually the end of the PowerPoint, and it actually brings the demonstration of the UI to an end as well. So hopefully it makes sense. The system administrator setting up those resources, and then the consumption from a vCorp or tenant admin perspective.
Yeah, it's perfect, Mark. So just so we know, and the folks on watching this know, where can we go to find out more information about this plugin and download it indeed, and try and kind of get it running?
Well, the interesting part here is that if you're a VMware customer and you have a relationship with Dell, hopefully most customers do, if you're a DPS customer specifically, you should be entitled to this plugin through support.emc.com, so through the Dell support site. What I would suggest is reach out to your local team. Your local team, if you're in EMEA, will probably reach out to me, and we can walk through the intricacies, because while it is a simple install, I'm very, very aware that people's VMware Cloud Director instances do vary. Some interesting configurations have arisen, and it's not always next finished. We do need to make sure that it deploys correctly. There's a whole bunch of documentation on the topic that I can provide customers with. also available to them on support.emc.com. So yeah, the best thing to do is reach out to your local team. I'm sure the VMware Cloud Director team guys must know somebody from Dell, so maybe they could broker the conversation as well. But it'll probably end up with me in some way, shape, or form if a request goes in. So yeah, reach out to your VMware team, to your Dell DPS team, read through the documentation, and we'll help you on your way to a successful deployment.
Brilliant, brilliant. So fundamentally, you should be able to get access through your support site then on Dell EMC. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I just while I'd love to say that it's it installs perfectly every time for everybody, I would just suggest that we work through the prereqs and make sure that everything's in place first, because there are moving parts, and it's one of those complex environments.
And Mark, does this support 10.2 VCD at the moment?
Absolutely does. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah,
that's good to know.
10.2. We tend to work a couple of versions back, so there is a compatibility guide. Again, it's in all the documentation and also in the release notes. We also tend to have a window of Dell Data Protection versions that are supported from the extension as well, because of course some customers have lots of different versions of software out there. We worked a couple of versions in the past, and then by exception further back if there is that requirement. But obviously, as always, the more up to date the versions are, the better it is for everyone from a user experience perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And we've put a lot of effort into Cloud Director, making that experience as good as it possibly can be, and obviously building out the features so providers can offer much better services to their customers. So it's definitely worth, if you can, keeping up to scratch with the releases, but not always easy.
Oh no, well understood, Guy.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, Mark, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for showing us around today. Really appreciate your time with the presentation and setting up the lab and showing us around the plugin and some of the new functionality. I think some of the things I was looking at there, like the ad hoc backups, and I believe that may have been new, but certainly the file level restore wizard and some of the other pieces here was new to me in any case. So really good to see. Anything to add before we close, Mark?
No, like I say, if you do have questions, I'm mark.stockham@dell.com. Should be able to answer questions on the topic. And if my knowledge of VMware Cloud Director starts to run into limits, then I know who to call Guy.
Excellent. I can help if possible. I can help. Yeah, great. Listen, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Guy. Bye.
Bye.